Imagine driving down an empty highway late at night, with nothing but the darkness and your headlights to guide you. But what if in the dead of night you realize you're not alone? Welcome to The Hunter on Highway 13, a true horror story that will make you think twice before ever driving alone again. In this tale, Alex thought it was just another late-night drive, until he encountered something far more sinister, lurking in the shadows. Stay with me as we uncover the terrifying truth, full of twists and suspense as Alex faces an evil that stalks the cursed road. I'm your host, Ghost Boy, and this is a nightmare that could happen to any of us. It was a cold October night, the kind where even the moon looked like it didn't want to come out, hiding behind thick clouds. Alex Stone, a long-haul truck driver, was used to driving at odd hours, but this night felt different, unnervingly quiet. His job was simple: pick up a load from a remote town in Montana and drive it all the way to Seattle. He'd done the route 100 times before, but something in the air tonight felt heavy off. The first few hours went by smoothly, the hum of the engine and the hypnotic sway of the road keeping him calm. He fiddled with the radio, but all he got was static. Strange, he thought. The radio had never failed him before. Shrugging it off, Alex focused on the road, surrounded by endless pine trees that seemed to close in as he ventured deeper into the wilderness. As he crossed the state line into Washington, that's when the strangeness began. Around 2 a.m., he spotted a lone figure standing by the side of the road. It wasn't uncommon for hitchhikers to be out this late, especially in this part of the country. But this one was different. Something about the way they stood perfectly still made his skin crawl. They wore a hood, their face hidden in shadow, but what unnerved him was how they didn't move a muscle, not even to wave for help. It was like they were waiting, watching. A cold shiver ran down Alex's spine as he passed the figure, but he brushed it off. "It's just some weirdo," he muttered to himself. But less than 5 minutes later, the same figure appeared again on the side of the road. His foot slammed on the brake instinctively. What the hell? He looked in his rearview mirror. Nothing. The figure had vanished. His heart pounded against his chest as he stared at the empty highway. He shook his head, trying to shake off the feeling. Maybe I'm just tired. Yeah, I'm just tired, he reasoned, pressing down on the gas pedal again. But the further he drove, the worse it got. Not even 15 minutes had passed when Alex saw it again. The same figure standing by the road, but this time they were closer. Much closer. Now fully awake, panic began to settle in. His eyes darted between the road and his mirrors, desperate for any sign of what was happening. The air in the truck grew colder, almost freezing, despite the heater blasting on high. His breath came out in frosty puffs. The lights on his dashboard flickered, and for the briefest second, the world around him seemed to shift. The figure wasn't just standing there anymore. It was moving. In the middle of the road, directly in front of him, Alex slammed on the brakes hard, tires screeching, the massive truck veering left and right. His knuckles turned white as he gripped the steering wheel. But before the truck could stop, the figure vanished again, like smoke dissipating in the night air. The truck came to a halt in the middle of the road, dead silent except for the sound of his heavy breathing. He sat there, hands trembling, staring at the empty road ahead. Suddenly, his radio crackled to life. A faint voice whispered through the static, barely audible but clear enough to send chills down his spine. "Turn back, don't go further." Alex's heart raced. His rational mind screamed at him to turn around, to leave this road behind and never look back. But something, some invisible force, compelled him to keep moving forward. Against all instinct, he started the truck again, driving deeper into the unknown. The road grew narrower, the trees now bending toward the highway, their branches like skeletal arms trying to grab him. The figure appeared again, this time in his side mirrors, walking slowly alongside his truck, its head tilted at an unnatural angle, as if studying him. Alex's pulse pounded in his ears. He stepped on the gas harder, the engine roaring as he sped down the darkened road. But no matter how fast he went, the figure kept up. Faster and faster it moved until suddenly, it was gone. Relief washed over him, but it was short-lived. Out of nowhere, his headlights caught something in the distance. A car, smashed beyond recognition, flipped over in a ditch on the side of the road. Steam rose from the wreckage, and there, barely visible, was a woman, slumped over the steering wheel, bloodied and broken. His gut told him to keep driving, to leave this nightmare behind. But Alex wasn't heartless. Someone might need help. He pulled over, grabbing his flashlight from the glove compartment, and slowly made his way toward the wreck. The cold air cut through his jacket as he approached the twisted metal heap. "Hello, can you hear me?" he called out, his voice shaky. No response. As he got closer, the hair on the back of his neck stood on end. The woman in the car wasn't moving. He shined his flashlight on her, but what he saw made his stomach turn. Her eyes were wide open, staring straight ahead, but there was no life in them. The blood on her face had long since dried. She'd been dead for hours. Alex took a step back, his heart thudding loudly in his chest. That's when he noticed it. Written in blood on the inside of the car's windshield were the words, "You're next." He stumbled backward, horrified, tripping over something soft. He turned his flashlight down, illuminating the ground. His heart stopped. The figure from the road was lying there at his feet, its face finally visible. A twisted, contorted mess of pale skin, hollow eyes, and a wide, unnatural grin stretching from ear to ear. Before Alex could react, the figure's eyes snapped open. Alex's heart nearly stopped as the figure at his feet slowly rose, its hollow eyes fixed on him, that grotesque grin stretching impossibly wide. He stumbled backward, fumbling for his truck as the figure stood motionless for a moment, its head tilted in that eerie, unnatural way, as if studying his every move. His breath came in short, panicked gasps. He'd seen some strange things in his time as a trucker, but nothing like this. This was no longer just a bad dream. This was real, and whatever this thing was, it wasn't human. Suddenly, the figure lunged toward him with unnatural speed, its bony hands outstretched. Alex bolted, running as fast as his legs could carry him, the flashlight beam bouncing wildly in the dark as he raced toward the safety of his truck. The air was freezing, his lungs burning with every ragged breath. He could hear it behind him, its raspy breathing, the soft crunch of gravel under its feet getting closer and closer. He reached the truck just in time, throwing himself inside and slamming the door shut. His hands trembled as he fumbled with the keys, finally jamming them into the ignition. The truck roared to life, and without a second thought, he slammed his foot on the gas pedal, the tires screeching as he sped away. The figure vanished into the night, but Alex could still feel its presence lurking somewhere in the darkness. For a few minutes, he drove in silence, his heart still racing. The road stretched ahead like a black ribbon, twisting and turning through the dense forest. He checked his mirrors constantly, half expecting the figure to appear again, but the road remained eerily empty. The radio crackled again, and this time the voice was clearer. "You can't outrun it, Alex." He nearly swerved off the road, his blood turning to ice. How did it know his name? He switched off the radio, but the voice continued, echoing through the cab like a sinister whisper in his ear. "It's not over." Alex gripped the wheel tighter, his knuckles white as he pressed harder on the gas, pushing the truck faster down the winding road. The trees seemed to close in around him, their gnarled branches reaching out like claws. He glanced at the dashboard clock, 3:33 a.m., the witching hour, they called it. A time when the veil between the living and the dead was said to be thinnest. He needed to get out of here, but the road, it felt endless, like he was trapped in some nightmare loop, driving deeper and deeper into the unknown. No matter how far he drove, it felt like he wasn't getting any closer to civilization. Just more road, more darkness. Suddenly up ahead, his headlights caught something. A glowing red light blinking in the distance. He slowed down, his pulse quickening. At first he thought it might be a traffic signal, but as he got closer he realized it wasn't a light at all. It was a pair of red eyes, staring directly at him from the middle of the road. Alex slammed on the brakes, the truck screeching to a halt. The eyes hovered there, unblinking, watching him. His heart pounded in his chest as he sat frozen, his hands gripping the wheel so tightly they hurt. The eyes began to move toward him, slowly at first, then faster until they were racing toward the truck. Alex threw the truck into reverse, but before he could move, the cab was filled with a deafening screech, like nails on a chalkboard. The red eyes disappeared, replaced by a figure in the road. This time it was a woman dressed in a tattered white gown, her long hair matted and wet, her face obscured by the darkness. She was pointing at him. Alex screamed, throwing the truck into reverse. The tires spun wildly as the truck lurched backward, but the woman was still there, moving toward him even though her feet never seemed to touch the ground. Then just as suddenly as she appeared, she was gone. Alex's breath came in ragged gasps as he stared at the spot where she had been. His hands trembled violently on the steering wheel. What the hell was happening? Was he losing his mind? His eyes darted to the rearview mirror, and for a moment, he froze. There, sitting in the passenger seat, was the woman, her pale, lifeless face turned toward him, her eyes wide and empty. Her lips parted, and in a voice that sounded like the dead, she whispered, "He's coming for you." Alex screamed, jerking the wheel hard to the left, sending the truck veering off the road. It smashed through the trees, the windshield shattering as the truck slammed into a ditch. The impact knocked the breath out of him, his head slamming into the steering wheel. Pain shot through his skull, and for a moment everything went black. When he opened his eyes, the woman was gone. The truck was wrecked, smoke pouring from the engine. Blood dripped down his forehead, but he was alive. Dazed and disoriented, he reached for the door handle, but before he could open it, he heard it again. The sound of footsteps, slow, deliberate. Getting closer, Alex's heart raced. He fumbled with the seatbelt, his fingers slick with sweat, trying to free himself. The footsteps grew louder, and then a hand slammed against the driver's side window. It was the figure again, its face pressed against the glass, that same twisted grin spreading wider and wider, until its jaw seemed to unhinge. "You can't escape," it hissed, its voice echoing inside Alex's mind. "You're next." The glass began to crack, the figure's hand pressing harder, its grin growing impossibly large. Alex could feel the walls closing in, his mind spiraling into panic. Just as the glass was about to shatter, headlights appeared in the distance, another truck, a lifeline. The figure recoiled, retreating into the shadows, disappearing as quickly as it had come. Alex shoved open the door and stumbled out into the road, waving his arms frantically. The truck screeched to a stop. The driver, a middle-aged man with a concerned look on his face, rushed out. "Are you all right?" the man asked, helping Alex to his feet. Alex looked back at the wreckage of his truck, then at the empty road behind him. "I don't know," he stammered, his mind still reeling from the horror of what he had just witnessed. "You're lucky I came by when I did," the driver said. "This road, strange things happen here at night. People have seen things they can't explain." The man looked away, his face grim. "People disappear on this road, and those who make it out, they're never the same." Alex swallowed hard, his throat dry. He wanted to leave, to put this nightmare behind him, but something told him it wasn't over. Alex could barely catch his breath. His truck was a smoldering wreck in the ditch, and the man who had stopped to help him, a middle-aged trucker named Jim, had a haunted look in his eyes. Alex was shaking, drenched in sweat despite the cold October night, and the words of the woman in his truck echoed in his mind. "He's coming for you." "What do you mean people disappear on this road?" Alex asked, his voice quivering. He glanced nervously at the surrounding trees, half expecting that figure to lunge out from the shadows again. Jim sighed heavily, looking down the dark road ahead, a grave expression on his face. "This stretch of highway's been cursed for as long as anyone can remember. I've been driving it for years, and I've heard more than my share of stories." About him, Alex swallowed hard, who Jim's eyes darkened. "The hunter. A spirit, or maybe something worse, that stalks these roads at night. Some say he's the ghost of a man who died in a crash decades ago, his body never found. Others say he's a demon, preying on those who lose themselves out here. But one thing's for sure, once you see him, you don't get away." Alex's pulse quickened. "I saw him or something. He's been following me." "That woman in the car, the figure on the road?" Jim nodded solemnly. "They're all his victims. He collects souls, Alex, and once he's locked onto you, there's no getting out." He paused, glancing at Alex's wrecked truck. Unless what?" Alex asked, desperate for any way out of this nightmare. Jim hesitated, his voice dropping to a near whisper. "Unless you can trick him, distract him long enough to make it to the end of this road. But few people make it that far." The wind picked up, rustling the trees, and Alex felt the temperature drop even more. The feeling of being watched crept back into his bones, that familiar, chilling presence looming just beyond the edge of the woods. Jim turned toward his truck. "We need to get moving. We'll head west. Stick together. But listen to me, Alex, don't look back. Whatever you do, don't look back. He feeds on your fear, on doubt. If you keep going, we might just make it out alive." Alex nodded, trying to steady his shaking hands. He didn't know if he could trust this man, if any of this made sense. But it was better than sitting there waiting to die. They climbed into Jim's truck, the engine rumbling to life. As they pulled away, the wreck of Alex's truck faded into the darkness behind them. He couldn't help but glance in the side mirror, watching as the twisted metal disappeared into the night. That's when he saw it again. The figure was standing in the road, closer this time, its wide grin gleaming in the pale moonlight. But something was different now. There were more of them. Figures lined the road on either side, their faces blank, eyes hollow, as if they were waiting, watching. "Don't look at them," Jim said sharply, his voice tight with fear. "Just keep your eyes forward. The more you notice them, the stronger they get." Alex tore his gaze away from the mirror, but his heart hammered in his chest. The truck rumbled on, the headlights cutting through the thick, oppressive darkness. The road ahead seemed endless, stretching into nothingness, and yet, with every mile, Alex felt the weight of unseen eyes pressing down on him, closing in from all sides. For what felt like hours, they drove in silence, the only sound the steady hum of the engine and the occasional crackle of the radio. Static, mixed with faint whispers. Alex couldn't quite make out. His mind was racing, every nerve on edge. Just when he thought he couldn't take the tension anymore, the truck began to sputter. "Jim," Alex said, his voice tense. "What's happening?" Jim cursed under his breath, hitting the dashboard as the truck slowed. "We're running out of gas." "That's impossible. I just filled up before I picked you up." The truck came to a halt in the middle of the road, the engine coughing and dying. Silence fell over them like a suffocating blanket. Alex's heart sank. "What do we do now?" Jim didn't answer right away. He stared straight ahead, his knuckles white on the steering wheel. Then, without looking at Alex, he said, "Get out, we walk." Alex felt a surge of panic on foot. "Are you crazy? We'll never make it." Jim turned to him, his eyes filled with a grim determination. "If we stay in the truck, we're sitting ducks." "He's out there, Alex. We need to keep moving. The town isn't far. If we can make it there, we might stand a chance." Alex hesitated, but the alternative, sitting in the dark, waiting for that thing to find them, was worse. He grabbed his jacket, and together they stepped out into the freezing night. The moment his feet hit the pavement, Alex felt it again. The overwhelming sense of being watched. The figures were still there, hidden just beyond the trees, their hollow eyes glowing faintly in the darkness. He forced himself to focus on the road ahead, on putting one foot in front of the other. They walked in silence, the road stretching out like an endless tunnel of doom. The whispers from the forest grew louder, almost as if the trees themselves were conspiring against them. And then, from somewhere behind them, Alex heard it. The unmistakable sound of footsteps. "Don't turn around," Jim hissed, his voice barely above a whisper. "Just keep moving, we're almost there." The footsteps grew louder, faster, closing in. Alex's pulse pounded in his ears. Every instinct screamed at him to look, to see what was coming for them. But Jim's warning echoed in his mind. "Don't look back." They kept walking faster now, their breaths coming in sharp, frosty clouds. The footsteps were right behind them, so close Alex could feel the cold breath of whatever was stalking them on the back of his neck. "Jim," he whispered, his voice trembling. "I don't think I can—" Before he could finish, a scream tore through the night. A high-pitched, blood-curdling wail that sent a wave of pure terror crashing over him. It was coming from ahead. Alex froze, his blood turning to ice. There, in the distance, standing in the middle of the road, was a figure. A woman, her arms outstretched, her mouth wide open in a silent scream. It was the same woman from the wrecked car. Her eyes locked onto his, and in that moment, everything around Alex seemed to fall away. The road, the trees, even Jim. All of it faded into the background, leaving only the woman and her soul-piercing scream. And then, from the darkness behind her, the hunter emerged. Tall, cloaked in shadows, its eyes glowing with a malevolent red light. It moved toward the woman with slow, deliberate steps, its grin growing wider, stretching its face into an unnatural, grotesque mask of evil. "No," Alex whispered, his body frozen with fear. "No, no." No, Jim grabbed his arm, yanking him forward. "Run." They bolted down the road, the sound of the hunter's footsteps pounding behind them. Alex's legs burned, his chest heaving with every breath, but he kept running, driven by pure primal terror. The woman's scream echoed in his ears as they raced toward the only glimmer of hope, the faint lights of a town just visible on the horizon. But the hunter was close, too close. Just as they reached the edge of town, Alex felt a cold hand brush the back of his neck. He stumbled, falling to the ground, the world spinning around him. He looked up, and there it was, the hunter, standing over him, its hollow eyes gleaming with cruel delight. "You can't escape," it whispered, its voice like death itself. Alex lay sprawled on the cold, unforgiving pavement, his body trembling with exhaustion and terror. His mind screamed at him to get up, to run, but his limbs felt like they were made of lead. The hunter loomed over him, its twisted grin wide and menacing, its eyes glowing with an unnatural, hellish red light. The world seemed to close in around Alex, the darkness pressing down, suffocating him. He could barely hear the sound of Jim's frantic voice calling out to him, urging him to get up, but the hunter's presence was overwhelming. It was as if all the light and warmth in the world had been sucked away. leaving only the cold grip of death. "You can't escape," the hunter whispered, its voice chilling. As if it spoke from the very depths of the grave, Alex's mind raced. He knew Jim was close, and here he was, face to face with the thing that had been stalking him, tormenting him since that fateful night on the road. He could feel the cold emanating from the hunter, as if the creature itself was a void, sucking the life out of everything around it. With a trembling hand, Alex tried to push himself up, his vision blurring from the pain that shot through his body. But before he could make a move, the hunter reached down, its bony fingers brushing his cheek. The touch was like ice, sending a wave of nausea through him. He could feel his strength draining, his will slipping away. "Get away from him." Jim's voice cut through the night, and out of the corner of his eye, Alex saw Jim swung it with all his might, aiming for the hunter's head. The impact should have sent the creature sprawling, but instead the wrench passed through the hunter as if it were made of smoke. Jim staggered back, his eyes wide with shock. "What the hell?" The hunter turned its gaze to Jim, its grin widening. It raised one hand, and with a simple flick of its fingers, Jim was hurled backward by an invisible force, slamming into a nearby tree with a sickening thud. "No," Alex screamed, his voice hoarse and weak. He forced himself to his feet, adrenaline surging through him despite the pain. He couldn't let this thing take him. He wouldn't let it win. But the hunter turned its attention back to him, its empty eyes locking onto his. "You're next," it hissed. Taking a step closer in that moment, something clicked in Alex's mind. He remembered Jim's words from earlier. "You have to trick him." The hunter fed on fear, on despair. If Alex gave in to that fear, it would consume him just like it had consumed the others. But what if he could fight back? Not with weapons. Summoning every ounce of strength he had left, Alex stood tall, staring the hunter down. "You won't take me," he said, his voice stronger than he expected. The hunter paused, its grin faltering for the briefest of moments. "What makes you think you can stop me?" it whispered, its voice like nails on a chalkboard, grating and terrible. Alex took a deep breath, his heart pounding in his chest. "Because I'm not afraid of you." For a moment, the air around them seemed to still, the oppressive darkness lifting ever so slightly. The hunter's grin faded, replaced by a look of confusion, as if it couldn't understand why Alex wasn't cowering before it. And that's when Alex made his move. He turned and ran, not away from the town, but straight toward it, toward the lights, toward salvation. His legs screamed in protest. His lungs burned with every breath, but he kept going, pushing himself harder than he ever thought possible. Behind him, he heard the hunter's enraged scream, a terrible, inhuman sound that echoed through the night. The ground seemed to shake beneath him, and Alex could feel the cold breath of the hunter on his neck, closing in fast. The lights of the town grew brighter, closer. He was almost there. Suddenly, something cold and sharp wrapped around his ankle, yanking him off his feet. He hit the ground hard, the breath knocked out of him as he was dragged backward. Alex clawed at the pavement, desperate to hold on, but the hunter's grip was too strong. He rolled onto his back, kicking out with his free leg, trying to break the hunter's hold. But the creature's grip only tightened, pulling him closer and closer, its hollow eyes burning with rage. "You can't run from me," it snarled, its voice a twisted mockery of human speech. "You're mine." Alex's mind raced. He was so close to freedom. He couldn't let it end like this. With a sudden burst of strength, he reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out the one thing he had left, the lighter he always carried with him. Flicking it open, he ignited the small flame, holding it up in front of him. The hunter recoiled, hissing like a wounded animal. The light from the flame seemed to burn it, its shadowy form flickering and wavering. Alex pushed himself up, still holding the flame in front of him. "Stay back," he shouted, his voice hoarse but filled with defiance. The hunter snarled, but it didn't move closer. It couldn't. The light was driving it back, weakening it. Alex didn't waste another second. He turned and sprinted the final few yards, crossing the invisible threshold into the town. The moment he did, the hunter let out a blood-curdling scream, a sound so terrible that it rattled Alex's bones. He turned just in time to see the creature dissolve into the darkness, its form breaking apart like smoke in the wind. It was gone. For a long moment, Alex stood there, panting, his heart racing. The town was quiet, peaceful even. The nightmare was over. Behind him, Jim stumbled out from the trees, bruised but alive. He looked at Alex, then at the spot where the hunter had vanished. "You did it," Jim said, his voice filled with awe. "You beat him." Alex nodded, though he could hardly believe it himself. The terror, the fear, the endless road. It was all behind him now. He was free. But as he and Jim made their way into the town, Alex couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. The hunter was gone, but the cursed road still remained. And deep down, Alex knew that somewhere, someday, the hunter would return. This is the end of Alex's terrifying journey, but many more horror tales await you. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the bell icon on Horror Stories with Ghost Boy for more spine-chilling tales. Until next time, stay safe out there and never drive the highway at night alone. This has been the terrifying story of the hunter on Highway 13, where nightmares come alive on the road. If you enjoyed this spine-chilling tale, make sure to hit that like button, share it with your friends, and subscribe to Ghost Boy for more heart-pounding horror stories just like this. Don't forget to tap the bell icon so you never miss a new scare-filled story. We've got more haunted highways, cursed places, and paranormal encounters waiting for you. Thanks for watching, and remember, the next time you're driving late at night, always watch the road, because you never know who's watching you.